I never loved myself. And as a result, I never had good boundaries.
Yeah.
Because if you don't love yourself, you don't really care how people treat you. And that was my biggest mistake. There were a lot of instances, these micro oversteps of my boundaries, and it just kept going and kept going. It just all ended up adding up, and you end up staying in a situation you probably shouldn't because,
Mhm.
you know, the
Yes.
worst is to have this huge upheaval and have to change your life.
You are listening to the 5 a.m. podcast, and today is your day. Good day and welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast. I'm your host, Michael Clausen. Well, it has been said that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. But today's guest lived through an experience that almost proved the first half of that proverb true. Imagine being with a partner for 8 years, only to have the life that you knew dismantled in an instant. A betrayal so deep that it caused a 40-pound weight loss and an internal heartbreak that nearly took his life. But instead of staying in the wreckage, he used his background in psychological testing to build a lighthouse for others. Joining us today is Justin Smith, a Tampa-based entrepreneur and founder of Cray, that's C-A-Y, like crayfish, or short for crazy, the world's first dating safety app, designed to spot red flags and those schemers before they cause permanent trauma. Today we're talking about rebuilding from the ashes, the psychology of red flags, and how to date with clarity instead of chaos. Justin Smith, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the 5am podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to talking, about everything I've been through so your audience can hopefully learn some, minds not to step on and
Yeah.
some better approaches to dating.
Yes. Now, what I was going to ask you first off is, can you take us back to that moment where maybe it was an aha moment, the light went on, you thought, I got to put all of this into an app to protect other people?
Yeah, it was, my partner of 8 years one day just blew up the marriage in a way that went against the values that we had in the marriage. And she took off with our son for a month. And as I started kind of researching the data of the situation, I realized she had transferred tens of thousands of dollars in the weeks leading up to the event, which then started making me realize I should probably dig deeper if, there were some financial transactions weeks before this event, because that shows premeditation. And as I dug deeper, it was just a nightmare. I just kept uncovering pieces of information that proved that this was someone who had a plot years in advance. And it was a terrifying experience because when I started realizing it was when I was at the trauma treatment center and I had left her in the house with two of my kids from a previous marriage and our son we had together. And she started using all that leverage against me, which was a horrific experience to go through.
Yes. So, Justin, you've been incredibly vulnerable about the Gone Girl moment in your life. For those who haven't experienced the blind side of that magnitude, and obviously sounds like a calculated blind side, what did it feel like when the person that you trusted for 8 years suddenly revealed a completely different identity?
Well, the worst part about it was she gaslit me for probably 6 months after that moment, still giving me the words of, oh, I do want to work this out and all this other stuff while doing all this other stuff in the background. And it felt, one of the comparisons I've used is it felt like you've ever heard those stories when someone's on the operating table and they're completely paralyzed and they're awake. It felt like that, but my surgeon knew I was awake and still kept doing all the painful stuff to me because they knew it would make me squirm and hurt. And that's a horrific feeling because it's this helpless, someone's drowning you in the pool and you can't fight it off kind of feeling. And you just have to take it because there's no path to protection or resolution for any, period in the near future.
Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're just starting to get into this tale, almost as old as time, perhaps. And you may be thinking of a friend who needs to hear this cautionary tale and the upcoming advice. So take a moment to share this episode with a friend or a coworker so that they too can jump into Justin's experience and find out how he came through on the other side. Now, Justin, you mentioned that your resting heart rate had actually hit 100 beats per minute and your blood pressure reached critical dangerous levels. At what point did you realize that this wasn't just a heartbreak in the truest sense of the word, but it was actually a psychological crisis?
I'd never felt physically the things I felt during that time, and that was the biggest clue to me. I felt like I had a live wire of electricity running through me, and still to this day, I feel that to some degree. I can't nap during the day. I need medication to sleep still 2 years after all this has happened. It has a very direct impact on your body. The heart rate and the blood pressure and all that. Even my mind, racing thoughts, thought loops, all those kinds of things. When you have a life crisis of that magnitude, I would compare it to the show Quantum Leap. I'm probably dating myself a bit, but it's like that show where I was taken out of my life, thrown into a life that was completely foreign, and I just had to recover and build a new life off of that. And that is a god awful experience for anyone to have to go through because, you build these support systems or you have these support systems in your life that in the back of your head, you think, if I ever have a life crisis, I have all those people I can rely on. I'm going to be okay. I was drowning in the pool screaming for help to everyone, and no one came to help me. And that was the moment I realized and transformed myself. I'm going to be the only person on my side ever in my own life. I need to be my own self advocate, my own protector. I need to get my sword and a gladiator shield and become the gladiator for my inner child from when I was younger and from the broken man that just got destroyed by all these people. And so once I, turned the energy and the pain into I'm going to prove all these people wrong and I'm going to use this bad experience to help other people. That was the transformational course for me, was realizing that I could either sit here and cry like I had been, or I could use all this pain and suffering and channel that energy into something that I could protect and help other people. And that's when I made that decision.
So, before we get a little bit farther into that decision, I want to ask you then, even about your children. How did you still be a father to them in all of this?
It's been challenging. I think being a parent in general is a hard job, but being a parent and loving children when all they say are mean or hateful things to you because they've been poisoned by the adults around them, that's a whole nother level of challenging. And then to also have to go to court and fight someone over these issues and all the false narratives that they throw in the court because they think it'll sway the judge and they know it'll take a year or two to disprove it so they can affect the custody in the meantime. It's a lot, man. It just got to the point where I just had to start laughing it off, kind of. Because what can you do about it all? What can you do about all this shit going wrong? Excuse my language. Sometimes you just have to say, this is crazy. This is too much. Look at for humor in it somehow.
Yeah, right. And so then in the midst of that 18-month recovery, can you talk about that light bulb moment where you stopped asking, why me? And started asking, how can I build a tool to stop this?
Well, there was a step before that, which was realizing how I had to treat myself moving forward if I wanted to recover from something like this. Because I realized that two things I was missing in my life that allowed this to happen is self love and boundaries. And boundaries come from self love. If you really lean into self love in the real sense, where you protect yourself, you eat well, you go to bed at a good time, then those boundaries just naturally rise up and it protects you from all these bad actors who just want to come in and use you or manipulate you or do these bad things to you. So I first started protecting myself that way. And then I started making sense or trying to make sense and build these questions and the app and the features. And as I got done with the questions for the Cray score, I realized I didn't cover the manipulation and deception piece. So then I did the schemer score. And then I realized there's the fake phone numbers people use. So I did the catfish check. And then I was like,
Okay.
well, crap, what if they'd been arrested? Then I did the background check and added that as a feature. So I really tried to think this through as like, if I was going to be deceptive and I was going to try and pull something over on someone, let me put some things in place that can kind of end that before it gets bad.
Yes, totally. Yeah, I'll thank the good Lord myself that I haven't had to use some a tool like this. But as you're talking, it makes me think of the power. of the word no. And in pop culture, of course, we hear the word yes. You know, they make movies about someone that's finally going to say yes. And I'm like, oh man, what'd you have to destroy that man's life for? But it sounds to me like all of these things that you're talking about that went into your app is actually a safety checklist of no. No, it's no. You definitely don't want that one. And so it seems to me that it's it actually also comes back to the self-love of we take care of ourselves, and so we say no to late night activities because we know we want a great sleep, we want a great
Hmm.
day tomorrow. So no, I'm not going to do something after, 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. or something like that because I've got to take care of myself and I got to get to the gym in the morning before work. So that was just a little aside, but it to me it's that value proposition of what you created. Now, I want to ask you about that your professional background in psychological testing and publishing influence the algorithms or the structure of the app. How tell us how that kind of came together.
Sure. Well, so my dad founded a psychological test publishing company. So I grew up learning about it, learning about the products. I worked at the business for 10 years, managing the marketing and branding. And I worked on the product marketing for specific tests. I did the logos for them and things like that as well. And I actually was the project manager and the designer for the first concussion recognition app that it came out for the iPhone back in 2011. It was called the Concussion Recognition and Response, and it was a list of symptoms that parents could look for in a child after they got hit in the head. And so as you see, it's a very similar product in terms of how it's developed and how it functions. So I was able to lean on that experience, but through the lens of having my life wrecked in a relationship and leverage that whole process and just create the same thing for dating safety and recognizing red flags in people. And so all the items are based on real psychological constructs that are based on psychological disorders such as narcissistic personality disorder, which will have a immensely negative impact on the relationship, but I break that into the signs and symptoms and look at them one at a time. And so it really is, it's not a diagnosis tool. I don't want to, because it does not provide a diagnosis, but it uses the diagnosis's symptoms and signs as data points for the app. So it is based on real psychology with real historical, validity. And I made sure of that because it's really behavior identification and education on why that behavior matters.
Wow. That is really good. I really like that. And friends, as you're listening, please help this algorithm that's out there spread this episode because it's important information. So give us a like and a comment. We're happy to hear your cautionary tale or your experience of saying, "Man, I wish I would have had that." But Justin, as we're kind of just getting into this conversation, really, but let's take a moment to talk about how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, the website is cray.app. All our socials, I think, are at cray.app. And if they want to email me directly, it's justin@cray.app. I'd love to hear feedback or, features that
Yeah.
they wish were in it, or just even hearing what a great, experience or bad experience they've had. Because I always look at this as an opportunity for growth and to make it a better tool. So I'd love to hear feedback from people.
Yes. What attracted my attention to you and your story and the app? We see that the camera ready people on the red carpets and standing getting their pictures taken. And I'm sure that if we put our favorite stars even through your app, we wouldn't let them in the door of our house to look after our children. We live in a world of deception, of people trying to pull one over on us, whether they want our heart, they want our treasure, they want our talents. People that, like the Bible says, the human heart is evil above all things. And it's kind of like your app is saying, who's got the evil heart? And right now she's at about 75%. So I
Well, what's
want to,
interesting,
yeah.
I am adding a piece to the app in the near future that I call the BAE score,
Okay.
BAE, like boyfriend,
Okay.
or girlfriend. And the goal is to outline the major qualities that people should look for in a healthy relationship, such as healthy communication, conflict resolution, things like that. Because, I do feel that while I've denoted and designated all the bad stuff, I do need to put in what they should look for so that people aren't just being educated on the negative stuff. That then now they have this small set of questions. I think it's like 36 questions that they can look at and start looking, oh, he actually, communicated to me that he was upset and did it in a healthy way. And that's great, So because I do think that because of this whole online social media world we're in now, parents probably aren't having the conversations they need to with their kids about what to look for in the people they date or what not to look for. So, I'm trying to look at it through that light, that lens too. I don't want to just focus on the bad stuff. I want to also give them direction about where to head for.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that you're adding that in because that actually can put some green lights over some people instead of just the stop danger, don't damage yourself with this
Yeah, and
one.
I don't
But
want to be negative
yeah,
about
mm,
everything too,
right.
because it's not good energy.
Yes, we want to be positive and we want to look for the good. So that's an excellent addition. Now, let's talk about the Cray score. Can you explain that difference between the Cray score and the schemer score and what specific behaviors are these tools actually looking for?
Yeah, so I designed each one. I don't want to say they're gender specific because
Okay,
there's no blanket statements, but
right.
the Cray score was in this idea that let's identify all the red flags. That's more what women deal with usually, because most men, if we're being honest, they're just happy to get attention from a female. So it's a whole different issue. The schemer score was with in mind all the online deception and financial manipulation and those kinds of things that happen to men online, where you match with a girl and then she's asking you for 20 bucks for going to get her nails done or whatever else it is. And so I wanted to give thought to relationship safety, manipulation and deception, and financial safety in terms of is this person trying to game me? So they're very different in the intent of what they're trying to measure. One is the craziness of the relationship, and the other is the deception, manipulation, and authenticity of the relationship.
Mm.
And
And
both
so
are
then
free because I wanted to make sure that everyone could access them and gain the most benefit from them.
right. Well, that's good too. Now, the red flags versus incompatibility. So many people might confuse a quirk with a red flag. So how does your app help users distinguish between someone who's just a bad match and someone who genuinely has an evil heart and is dangerous?
Well, there is no matchmaking in the app. Is really just consider it if you filled out a quiz about your partner just to learn more about them or the relationship. And that's what I would denote it. I think that the goal is just to give people a bunch of data that informs them so they can then make an informed decision about the person they're dating.
Yeah, and that truth, man, that it's the spotlight that it turns on and our
Well, it's hard too. We
yeah.
don't want to believe it sometimes. Sorry, I didn't
Mhm.
mean to interrupt.
No, no, that's good. You're right, we don't. And we'll get into the minefield in a second, but I was just thinking when I was a teenager, school was done, I was moving into this apartment and I turned the lights on and these little critters that I did not see when the light was off, they went running for darkness to hide. I think that's appropriate for this point in the conversation, but I got to ask you about how you've called dating a minefield. How do you think that modern dating apps have maybe inadvertently made it easier for scammers and manipulators to thrive?
I think and this is probably a little bit of a pessimistic view about online dating, but I compare the dating apps, at least Tinder or some of those that are more the mass market ones, to much like produce being left on a shelf at a grocery because it's bruised or damaged or no one wants it.
Yeah.
People who have a great social support system and a great network of people usually find people to date automatically. And so it's really the people who maybe have interpersonal issues or may have lifestyle issues or may just be a sociopath out to exploit someone and gain something from them. So there's a higher rate of those people on the dating apps. And, there's a higher rate of women who manipulate on the dating apps because men go on them because they're lonely and they want attention. They're looking for someone to date. And so you have these sharks that are just preying in the wings, waiting for those men to come on there. And it's become a very inauthentic experience and a dangerous one because, this isn't just, oh, they're gonna, badmouth me to someone. It could be they blackmail you. It could be that they, do a false charge against you and you end up in jail. The stakes in these relationships are very high. It's not the old days where, the worst you would get is they would spread a rumor at you at school or something.
Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. That's an important and integral part of what you're doing is protecting people who don't know what they need to be protected from. Why do we often maybe talk ourselves out of that initial gut feeling when we meet a manipulator? And how does your app hopefully validate that gut instinct?
Well, I think part of it is the human need to be loved. Everyone wants to be loved. And there's some of us that end up in bad relationships where we never receive the love we're owed. And then we go on dating apps and maybe get mistreated by people or walked on by people because we've never been treated right. And so it kind of creates this continuation of that pattern because people aren't breaking out of the cycle, so, so to speak. They're not asking themselves the right questions. Should I be dating? Is this the right person to be dating? Or is this just someone who's giving me attention and I need attention and I love attention? So I'm going to stay here because they're giving me the attention I need and it's better than sitting at home by myself. So it creates a lot of issues, like that's why I say online dating these days is really risky more than it is beneficial, at least as you get into the older ages, because, the produce that's left on the shelf, it gets worse and worse as you get older.
That's right. Yes. So then to think back to your dating experience with your partner before you got married, if you look back now, would you say, "Ah, I should have used some more boundaries," or I should have how would you fill in that blank?
I think my two biggest issues were that I never loved myself. And as a result, I never had good boundaries. Because if you don't love yourself, you don't really care how people treat you. And that was my biggest mistake. There were a lot of instances, these micro oversteps of my boundaries, and it just kept going and kept going. And, at that point, you have a sunk cost of I've already been in the relationship all that time. Am I really going to fight this? All that kind of stuff that comes into play. It just all ends up adding up, and you end up staying in a situation you probably shouldn't because, you know, the worst is to have this huge upheaval and have to change your life and all this kind of stuff too.
That sunk cost, it would work in both of men's and women's minds of, "Oh, man, I've already put in this amount of time," and, we're kinda going to that do we go to that next step? And if I break it off with this person that I don't really want to admit that he or she is a jerk or an abuser in some way. And then we think, like, how long did it take me to find them? And then now I've got to start the process over again. Can you give a little bit of advice to the listeners who are listening that those thoughts might be running through their head of, is it worse to break it off or is it going to be worse to keep going? Or could we maybe fix it?
Depends who your partner is, really, because in my case, it wouldn't have mattered what I did, how much marriage counseling we did, or anything else, because her goal all along was to eventually leave me and take money. So that goes back to the picking the right partner thing. If you don't pick the right partner, it doesn't matter how much work you put in. It doesn't matter how good of a person you are. It doesn't matter how much you support them. 'Cause they don't care. They're not there to be a good partner. They're there to use you,
Exactly.
take you, and then move on to their next situation once they've upgraded their life enough or, they've destroyed yours.
Yeah. Yeah, they're really climbing a ladder by themselves and they don't care who they push off to their death. As as if we use that ladder analogy, if we're trying to make it up a ladder with a partner. Yeah. Wow, that's
Yeah, and you don't wanna
high
play chicken
stakes.
with a game of chicken with someone who's crazy because 'cause you're gonna lose every time. The crazier person's not gonna back off. They're gonna be like, "Alright, let's see how far this goes."
Yes, that's right. That was a conversation I had with a lawyer once many years ago. He said his worst opponent in the courtroom is a terrible lawyer because you don't actually know what they're going to do. There's way too many wild card moments. You have chosen to make the main features of Cray free, as you mentioned earlier. As an entrepreneur, how do you balance the need for a sustainable business and that mission of keeping people safe?
Well, so far, just to be transparent, I've spent about 80,000 on the app in terms of the development and marketing and promotion, merch, stuff like that. But my feeling was that an app runs on a phone, doesn't have data costs, any of that. So what would it hurt me if I made it free? It wouldn't really hurt me. I wouldn't have any costs. So to me, it was like, this is how I make the biggest splash. This is how I fix dating. This is how I protect people. The money will come. My goal is to get contracts with colleges for orientation education. They put the kids on this course. They take the course. They now know how to use the app. They've been educated on dating safety. And now the school benefits from it because they now have things in place outside of the blue phone light or campus safety. 70% of students' interactions occur off campus. So this will be a great tool to provide a safety net for those kids who literally just left their parents' house, have never dated, and now have literally an endless supply of people to hook up with, and they're not filtering them at all through anything. So college students I see as being one of the big populations, people who are newly divorced or separated after a long relationship, and people with trauma. Because people with trauma don't recognize red flags. It's impossible. Because a child who grew up with a dad that drinks a case of beer or a mom that drinks a case of beer isn't going to think it's a big deal when their partner's drinking half a case or a case a night. So, those are the ways I see that it'll have the biggest impact for people.
Yeah. And I could see this would also be really good for widows and widowers who, no fault of anyone's, they are finding themselves single. And I would suspect that they too would really need those red flags, especially however long that grieving and emotional process is. Now, beyond the personality traits, Cray checks that legal history and the catfishing. And I've been thinking of crayfish ever since we started talking. Comes along with the catfish on how do you pull that data in a way that provides real-time safety for a user on a first date?
Yeah, so for the catfish check, we have one data supplier that is a very large data security company. And then for the legal history check, we have the same thing. There are two different suppliers because it's two different sets of data, but it is through large companies that this is what they do. I figured, I'm not going to be the one to invent these things. I'm going to, use an API and pass through the information.
Yes. Now, many listeners are going through their own wreckage. What is your advice for the person that feels they've lost everything? They don't know how to start that next chapter. What is the first step that they can take?
It's a great question. You're talking about starting over after a life crisis or after a
That's right.
divorce?
Well, it could be after a life crisis or a trauma-inducing relationship.
Well, I think for me, an important step in rebuilding myself was coming up with my core values. So, one of the things I was taught in treatment when I was there is that people who are unhappy in life but can't put their finger on it, it's usually because they're living outside of their value set. And so coming up with 3 words, and using those as your, values then helps drive everything else. So for me, mine were family, kindness, and loyalty. Those are my core values. I will do anything for my kids. I will throw myself in front of a bus. I will chop an arm off. It doesn't even matter. Loyalty, I feel, falls into that too. I would do anything for my friends. And I'm a kind person. I do homeless outreach. I've been doing that for 15 months. I started that during when my life was horrible. Started just walking up to homeless people, having conversations with them and feeding them. And, once you figure out what you're made of, what your values are, what the core of you is, the rest of the stuff kind of just naturally kind of falls into place, which is nice. I think you really just have to do a lot of soul searching and ask yourself, who are you? Who are you? Who do you want to be? How are you going to make that happen?
So then after the months of rebuilding that you've had, what does healing look like for you versus maybe 12 to 18 months ago?
It's a long road, I'll be honest. My ex-wife, turned my entire family against me. So interpersonal relationships are really hard for me. To lose your entire support system and feel non-existent, is an awful feeling. So there's been a lot of growth in terms of loving myself, spending time with myself, dating myself, doing things that, get back to treating myself like I matter. And I think that's an important value set that someone who's recovering from trauma needs to have, because trauma comes from people mistreating you or not caring about you or abandoning you. And you have to send the core, message to yourself that you matter and that you're here for yourself and you're not going anywhere.
Absolutely. Being able to take that stand for who you are. And if no one else is going to take it, then we have to find that internal strength to really put that stake in the ground. So you talk about dating with clarity instead of chaos. What does a healthy, clear first date look like to you now?
One where you're focused on a mutually enjoyable activity, that you're getting to know each other. It's not sitting and watching a movie where you're not talking or having any interaction. Maybe something that's an activity like pool or walking around downtown to check out different, restaurants or night spots, just to see how people interact with other people. If you're out in a social situation, is your guy staring at every woman that walks through the restaurant? Is your date, is she rude to the waiter and mistreats them? Go to places where you can see some dynamic interactions so you can see what the person's like. Because if you go to someone's house, you're not seeing what they're like. Chances are they're just trying to get you in the bed. So you really have to be intentional with, how you date and what kinds of activities you choose. And if you're setting yourself up for a good relational foundation.
Yeah, that person, place, and activity. Couldn't find another P for activity, but it's true of being able to see the wild animal in the natural habitat and not yeah, I like that. That's the problem with watching movies is you don't actually get to talk and interact. You're both being your mind is being entrapped by the images on the screen. Yes. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how
yeah,
are you supposed to start conversation if you're ruining the movie every time you lean over
yes.
and,
That's
trying to
right.
create that connection?
Yeah, and then you're just annoying the person you're with and the people around you because you wanna connect, and that talking and that being able to, the eye gate, the ear gate, the mouth gate that we talk about here on 5 AM podcast, it's so important to utilize those for the results that we're looking for. Now, you asked the question, "Would Cray have helped me leave my most traumatic relationship sooner?" When you look back at that 8-year relationship through the lens of your app, what what was maybe the first red flag that you missed?
I can tell you what the first one was. The first day I introduced her to my kids, there was this part of me that I was like, it was just like one of those like, this could be a sign of something. And I know it sounds stupid, but I had always told my kids that Justin Bieber was a piece of work, not a great guy because of the way he behaved. And it was just always what I told my kids. First day she met my kids, oh, Justin Bieber's great. I love him. And your dad's wrong. And I'm like, holy crap, here's someone who is coming into a situation where my kids respect me and love me, and the first thing that they say, that they come out with, is to undermine my authority and devalue my opinion. I mean, it just that's craziness, and because I didn't have good boundaries and I didn't love myself, that kind of action didn't ring in my ears like, "Oh crap, this is a red flag."
Boy, that's a powerful statement and audit of, well, not only yourself, but also other people. Are they going to is their default to lift you up as an individual? And not because 'cause you're selfish and you wanna be lifted up, but if they don't support you on day 1, dollars to donuts, they're not going to support you on day 2700. So, what is your ultimate vision then for Cray? You've talked about the universities and the students. Where do you see, or do you see, a world where Cray score is a standard, like maybe a credit rating, but in the dating world?
That's my goal, is to make a household name. I really want to fix dating. I want to come out with a dating guide to educate people how to properly date. The goal is all about fixing this mess that our dating world has turned into, because it's no one knows what they're doing. No one's being nice to each other or playing nice in the playground, and it's creating a lot of trauma for people. And as I learned, this is trauma it affects you the rest of your life. It ruins your life. It makes it so you can't sleep, can't eat, almost die. So if I can help fix that and have a butterfly effect and everyone, even 10% of people use the app and save trauma, that's huge.
Yes. Wow. Powerful conversation. Justin, thank you for your bravery in sharing your story and putting yourself out there to be so vulnerable and to create this app and really putting light on all those little cockroaches I encountered all those years ago. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me on your podcast. I greatly appreciate it. Any chance I get to get the word out and talk about my story and be vulnerable and hopefully teach people that, picking the partner, whether it's a hookup or not, it does matter. So treat every person as, someone you should filter through Cray or otherwise.
That's right. And it's almost as you're talking, those momentary relationships. This might actually be more powerful for those momentary relationships than the long term ones where you know you're going to work on things together. But yeah, it's inspiring to see how you took a moment that nearly destroyed you and you turned it into a shield for others, and that's commendable. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you're listening, if you've ever felt that gut feeling, that intuition that something was off and it wasn't right, or if you want to ensure that your next romantic chapter is built on safety and clarity, please go to cray.app, cray.app. You can find the links to the iOS and to the Android stores right there. You can also simply search Cray Dating Safety in your app store. So let's work together to make some relationships a little bit better, less stormy and rocky, and some better dates. So, Justin, thanks again for joining us today for the 5 a.m. podcast.
No, thank you. And I appreciate it.
And to our listeners, remember your time and your heart are your most valuable resources. Please be fierce in your protection of them. And also, my other request, please seize your day. Enjoy those sunrises and sunsets and all those beautiful adventures in between. I'm Michael Clausen, and I will see you next time on the 5 a.m. podcast. Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. 5 a.m. Podcast is brought to you in part by mkci.ca, a certified member of the Autodesk Developer Network. MKCI helps companies maximize their AutoCAD, Inventor, Navisworks, and other design software investments. Their innovative products like the CommandSys script editor and the Clash Management Suite will streamline your workflow and boost your productivity. Visit mkci.ca today to discover how they can enhance your competitive CAD advantage. That's mkci.ca. Thank you for your support of 5 a.m. Podcast.